Okay, so tonight what we're going to do, and I'd forgotten about this. I thought we were going to go right into 4 and 5, and I remember we need to go through Daniel first. So tonight we're going to be going through the book of Revelation. I'm sorry, the book of Daniel, and understanding ages from the beginning to the end. So last week I talked to you about the 7 churches of Asia Minor, not only being historical churches, and that those letters having importance in the time they were written. So those words written there had meaning to the readers at the time they were written in 95 AD, but they have a prophetic message in them too that tells us the time. So we have the Church of Ephesus, which was the apostolic church from 30 to 100 AD. Then we had Smyrna, 100 to 313 AD. Then we had Pergamum, which is the Roman Empire church, 313 to 600. Thyatira, which is the Roman Catholic Church, 600 to 1517. Reformation Church, 1517 to 1648. The Missionary Church, from 1648 to 1900. There was some great evangelists in that period of time. And then the Apostate Church, 1900 to question mark, because it's still going on now. So one of the things that I didn't mention last week, I do want to mention before I move on, is that even though we live in the apostate church age, it doesn't mean that we're all horrible people or anything like that. There is a remnant. In the passage, it talks about there's a remnant. And for those who overcome the apostate church, like what we're trying to do and what a lot of churches are trying to do, to be biblically accurate and to stay committed to the scriptures and to share our faith with others, those churches, Jesus said in that letter, he said, you will rule with me on earth. So when he comes back for his second coming, he will then rule on the earth for 1,000 years, and we will rule with him. We will be at his right hand. We will be on the throne when he rules. So that's the promise for those of us in this age who remain faithful and true, and have the bright morning star burning inside of us and keep us not lukewarm, but instead fiery hot for Jesus. So that's the good news in the midst of the bad news of the apostate church. Moving on now. So we learned last week about ages. We have the church age, and throughout the Bible, and actually there are 5 sets of ages we're going to get to in a little bit, but throughout the Bible there are ages and there are last days. So ages is a long but finite time in God's timeline. So throughout time there was 5 ages, okay, and you're going to see what those ages are tonight. But there were 5 ages, and they were finite. They had definite times. God brought them into being, and God conquered them through other kings and stuff. So throughout time, as we're going to read along here, is that God will raise up a king, and not always this, because not all these times were Jewish times, but he will raise up a king like Nebuchadnezzar and others to rule, and then eventually he will raise up a new king to overthrow him. And those are parts of the ages and stuff that we're going to be talking about. So let's talk first about ages itself. And this comes from Matthew chapter 29, verse 30. And this is the only passage I'm doing in the NIV. I just think it was easier to understand in the NIV than it was in the Christian Standard Bible. But it says, "Truly I tell you," Jesus replied, "no one who has left home or brothers or sisters or mother or father or children or fields for me and the gospel will fail to receive 100 times as much in this present age." So this present age, for us, is right in here now. So whatever we give up for God, we will get 100 times more. And it goes on to say, homes, brothers, sisters, mothers, children, and fields, along with persecution. Another thing that comes in this age is persecution. And in the age to come, eternal life. So we know that we are living in the last age before the final age. Okay, so the last age, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but the last age is the age of the Gentiles, and I'm going to explain what all that means in a little bit. But then after that comes the last age, which is the new age, not New Age movement, but the new age, which is the new heaven and new earth, when Christ returns and establishes his kingdom, and then the great white throne. I'm getting ahead of myself, but the great white throne comes, and then eventually the new heaven and new earth, and we dwell with God forever, eternal. This kingdom, this age will never end. Every age before that had a definite beginning date and a definite ending date, but this one will last forever. Which brings me to the fact that we live in the last days. We live in the last days before the next age. The final age before the last age is the last days. And the passage I put in here to go along with that comes from Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. And it says, long ago, God spoke to our ancestors by the prophets at different times, so different ages and in different ways. And these last days he has spoken to us by his Son God. God has appointed him heir of all the things made in the universe through him. So this is saying that up until this point, so the beginning of the last days is when everything has been met. All the prophets have spoken. Now Jesus Christ himself has come and dwelled on the earth, and he has finished it. There's no more markers. There's no more revelation. There's no more scripture. We are now living in the last days. In fact, when Jesus died on the cross, what did he say at the very end before he died? It is finished. We have completed all of God's work leading up to the last days. So we, from the time of Jesus' death until whenever Jesus Christ raptures his church, we are living in those last days. That's the time frame of the last days. So to give you a little more clarity, here are the 5 ages of time. The first is the age of the ancient world. That would be from Adam to Noah. So that would be the world in its very beginning. Methuselah, all those people during that period of time. The age of the patriarchs, which would be Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So that's an age period there. Some of these are shorter, some of these are longer. The age of the ancient world was longer than the age of the patriarchs. The age of the Jews, which started with Moses and really became the true age of the Jews when David became king. And then from David, there were 19 or 18 kings after David. So that period of time of the age of the Jews. Then we come to the age of the Gentiles. This is included in the church age in the last days. I'm going to explain more about that in a minute. But the age of the Gentiles begins when Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, conquers Jerusalem and carries away the captives. Among those captives who are carried away is Daniel, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. I know their Hebrew names, but I can never remember. It's like Hananiah. Yeah, that's the only one I can remember. But anyway, those 3 individuals those 4 individuals were individuals who were part of the royal court in Jerusalem, and they're carried away at the age, I think, of around 16. All of them were when they're carried away, and then they become high officials within the court of Babylon through their time. And then the last stage is the new heaven and the new earth, and it's eternal. And that's where we're going to. That's the next stage. That's what we all should be looking forward to. If we're believers in Jesus Christ, we should be excited about the fact that one day Jesus Christ is going to come back and establish his kingdom on earth, and then eventually this earth will be gone and a new heaven and a new earth will replace it. And I think I don't want to get too far ahead of myself in the book of Revelation and other parts, but the new heaven and new earth, it literally means that heaven and earth will become one again. Back in the time of Adam and Eve, heaven and earth were combined in the Garden of Eden. God walked with Adam and Eve. God spent time with Adam and Eve. And then after they sinned, that separation happened. And heaven and earth were separated. And the Garden of Eden was closed to us. And so a time is coming again in the last day, or in the last age, where heaven and earth will be combined again, and it will be eternal. So, I want to read to you out of Luke chapter 21, verses 20 through 24. It says, "When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that its desolation has come near. Then those in Judea flee to the mountains. Those in the city must leave it, and those who are in the country must not enter it, because these are the days of vengeance to fulfill all things that are written. Woe to the pregnant woman and nursing mothers in those days, for there will be great distress in the land, wrath against the people. They will be killed by the sword and be led captive into all the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled," or the age of the Gentiles. I put the parentheses there as mine. The age of the Gentiles is fulfilled. So this passage has, and I've shared this with you already before, this passage has an immediate interpretation and a long-term interpretation, or an immediate fulfillment and a long-term fulfillment. So Jesus is crucified in AD 33. Okay, that's when Jesus is crucified. 37 years later, and remember when he comes in the triumphal entry, which we're going to talk a little bit about tonight, but when he comes in on the triumphal entry, he's sad over Jerusalem and says, "Woe is me, woe is Jerusalem, for if you had known what was coming to you today," and he's talking about if you knew who I was, you could be saved, but instead you will face worse punishments than even Tyre and Sidon had faced. And we find out, and he goes on and he says, not a single stone will be left unturned. The towns and everything will be destroyed. And that's really what happens. In fact, and I would encourage you all, we got to take a trip to Israel. But when you go to Israel, especially when you go to the Western Wall, and I've been, and in the weeks to come, I'm going to show you pictures because it really helps us to understand a lot of what Daniel's and what John is showing us. But if you look down, if you're on the Western Wall, or the Wailing Wall they call it, it's the only mount left of the original temple, or parts of the original temple. It goes on down below. I was actually privileged, wasn't supposed to be there, to go down beneath, about 20 feet beneath that, to see the actual stones in Solomon's temple. We weren't supposed to be back there. This guide says, "Hey, you want to come back?" And then when you get back, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but when you get back there, they have this mock, or this scaled version of the temple in this big meeting room, and they bring the Israeli soldiers in there all the time and show them, because they are even at that time preparing for that. And I'm going to explain that more in the weeks to come. But anyway, but if you look down the grates there at the Western Wall, there's grates, and you look down. If you look down 35 feet, that's where you'll see the original Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is built out of stone. There's no dirt. It's built on a mountain. It's built on Mount Moriah, and so the same mountain that Abraham went to sacrifice Isaac on. But anyway, so it's built on that. So every time it is sacked, every time it is destroyed in rubble, they just bring more stones in and build on top of it. So there's about 35 feet of rubble between the original Jerusalem and the Jerusalem that's in the city now. Because from AD 70 on, Jerusalem is attacked and destroyed through the Crusades and other times. It's just continually sacked and destroyed, and that's what this is talking about. Not just what happens in 70 AD, but all the way through the time, even when the Antichrist comes, the city of Jerusalem will be destroyed by Gentiles, and that has come true many times fold up until this point. And again, in 70 AD, they completely leveled the city of Jerusalem and the temple, and they drove out the people, and the last of the people held up a Masada, which was a temple on a mountain by the sea, by the Dead Sea, that was created by Herod the Great, and 1,000 Jews went up there to try to avoid being killed by the Romans. And the Romans built, and that you can still, if you go there today, you can still see the ramparts, the ramps that the Romans built to get at the Jews and eventually kill them. So this is, Jesus is predicting something that's going to happen not only in 70 AD, but what's going to happen for a long time up until even today. People still want to, Gentiles still want to destroy Jerusalem. I mean, you just look at our news and some of the people that are talking and stuff. It's the reality of what's going on. So we're going to get now into Daniel because Daniel really helps us explain what's going on. And I'm going to give you a little background. So Nebuchadnezzar had only been in power in Babylon for 2 years. So right after he becomes king of Babylon, God anoints him, and not only is he the king of Babylon, but he conquers all the known world at the time. And in fact, we're going to find out later on that God said to him, "Hey, listen, you are my man. You have the authority over everything." And so he's been king for 2 years now, and he has this recurring dream of the statue, and eventually the statue collapsing and stuff. And it's really got him freaked out. He can't sleep. So he goes to his magicians, to his wise men, to his Chaldeans. By the way, Chaldeans are the same people who were the wise men who came to give gifts to Jesus. So it's kind of interesting in there. But anyway, it says, "My word is final. If you don't tell me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn from limb to limb, and your houses will be made a garbage dump. But if you make the dream and its interpretation known to me, you will receive gifts, a reward, a great honor from me. So make the dream. So make the dream and its interpretation known to me." So actually, this is a very wise thing that Nebuchadnezzar does. He wants to know the truth. So he says, "I'm not going to tell you what I'm dreaming, so that I know that you know the true interpretation. You have to tell me what my dream was." And he is extremely angry. He's threatening to kill everybody, all of the wise men, including Daniel, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, if they can't tell him about this dream. So then he goes on in verse 10 and it says, "The Chaldeans answered the king, 'No one on earth can make known what the king requests. Consequently, no king, however great and powerful, has ever asked anything like this of any magician, Median, or Chaldean. What the king is asking is so difficult that no one can make it known to him except the gods." That's wrong, because the gods have no power in them. Only God can. "Whose dwelling is not with mortals." Because of this, the king became violently angry and gave orders to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. The decree was issued that the wise men were to be executed, and they searched for Daniel and his friends, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, to execute them. By the way, Daniel's Babylonian name was Belteshazzar. Anyway, so now the head of the king's army goes out and he starts to round up all of the wise men, all of the wise men of the court, and he goes and he finds Daniel and his 3 friends, and he says, "You must come with me, because the king is mad because nobody can interpret his dream, so you're going to have to come with me." And Daniel pleads with him. He says, "Wait, don't do this. Don't stop right now. Please go back to the king and ask him for the favor to give me 1 day, so that I can speak to my God." and see if I can come up with the interpretation. And so that's where we're at now. And so it goes. And I'm sorry. And so then he goes back to the king. The king says okay, and then Daniel prays to the Lord with his three friends. They both, all four, pray earnestly to the Lord. And that night, while he was sleeping, Daniel was given the vision that Nebuchadnezzar had, and he was also given the interpretation of that vision. And so that's what we're going to be reading now. The mystery was then revealed to Daniel in a vision at night, and Daniel praised the God of heavens and declared, "May the name of God be praised forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. He changes the times and the seasons," which is kind of what we're talking about tonight. He's the one in control of all the ages, all the times, all the seasons. He removes kings and establishes kings, which we're going to talk about tonight. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals the deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. I offer thanks and praise to you, God of my ancestor, because you have given me wisdom and power, and now you have let me know what we asked of you. You have let us know the king's mystery. So this is a prayer he has once of praise after God has revealed to him this dream. Next thing is he goes to Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar says, "Can you answer my dream?" And he goes, "No, I can't." And this is what he says. Daniel answered the king, "No wise man, medium." He says, "No, I cannot." And then he goes on and says, "No wise man, medium, magician, or diviner is able to make known to the king the mystery he asks about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has let King Nebuchadnezzar know what will happen in the last days." Oh, we've heard that term before. "Your dream and the visions that come into your mind as you lay in bed were these." So now he goes on and he tells him his dream. "As for me, this mystery has not been revealed to me, not because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but in order that the interpretation might be made known to the king, and that you may understand the thoughts of your mind. Your Majesty, as you were watching, suddenly a colossal statue appeared. That statue, tall and dazzling, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was terrifying. The head of the statue was pure gold, its chest and arms were silver, its stomach and thighs were bronze, its legs were iron, and its feet were partly iron and partly fired clay." So this is a vision that Nebuchadnezzar had, and that was revealed to Daniel by God. And this is what it would have looked like. This is a artist rendering of it. This is Daniel's statue, the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. It's the timeline of the age of the Gentiles. So again, Nebuchadnezzar starts the age of the Gentiles, and it actually continues today. So all of time from Nebuchadnezzar on is explained in this statue. It's kind of cool. The fact that Daniel was able to predict, to prophesy about things that were going to happen over 3,000 years after this period of time. It's just mind-boggling. In fact, some debate, and I don't agree with it, but some say, "Oh, well, Daniel couldn't have been written in the time it was written because it's too accurate. It tells to the precise meaning of all the kingdoms that come after Nebuchadnezzar. So it had to be written after these kingdoms." No, it wasn't. It was written in the time. This would have been written around 600. This part of it would have been written around 600 AD. 600 BC. Jesus is born in around 3 AD. Dies in 33 AD. So we have this period of time in here that my brain just went dead. That explains all this period, and it's quite amazing. Here's what I always tell people: when you read this, when we get through all this today, if you're not a believer in Jesus Christ, I'm thinking you will be, because this is amazing. And someone who can tell the future to such a precise way throughout history, that should give us confidence that he also holds the future for us, and that we can put our trust in him. So anyway, I'm going to go on here a little bit. So Daniel 2 statue again. The statue represents 4 Gentile world empires. They become increasingly strong, but less majestic. Not only less majestic, but they become less. The morality of each surpassing kingdom, the morality level continues to go down and down and down until we get to Rome, which was one of the most depraved, until our history was one of the most depraved kingdoms that were there between. I don't want to get into all the grossness, but there was a lot of evil things that were going on in that kingdom. The age of the Gentile kingdom lasts until the Christ kingdom arrives, when Jesus Christ returns. Okay, so we're going to get into the interpretation now. Your Majesty, you are King of Kings. Now, some people will look at that and go, wait a minute, isn't Jesus King of Kings? And he is. That's a small K, not a big K. But even God himself refers to Nebuchadnezzar as King of Kings because he gave him that title. It's not the King of Kings. It's the King of Kings for the time that he lived in. The God of heaven has given you sovereignty, power, strength, and glory. Wherever people live, or wild animals, or birds of the sky, he has handed them over to you and made you rule over all of them. You are the head of gold. So Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon, is the head of gold. And not only am I going to send out this video, but I'll send out the slideshow so you can have copies of this, because you're going to want this. So then it goes on and it says, but my great strength, this is from Jeremiah. This kind of helps us to understand what Daniel just said. But my great strength and outstretched arm, I made the earth and the people and the animals on the face of the earth. I gave it to anyone I please. So now I have placed these lands under the authority of my servant Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. I have given him the wild animals to serve him. All the nations will serve him, his son and his grandson, until the time for his own land comes. So in other words, till the end of his age. And then many nations and great kings will enslave him. That is Babylon. So here we go. So the head, it doesn't really look like gold there, but that is gold. The head of gold is Babylon. Now we're going to find out what the next 3 are. After you, there will rise another kingdom inferior to yours. By the way, any questions about any of this so far? No? Okay. Inferior to yours. And then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which will rule the whole earth. A fourth kingdom will be as strong as iron, for iron crushes and shatters everything, and like iron that smashes, it will crush and smash all the others. You saw the feet and the toes, partly of a potter's fired clay and partly of iron. It will be a divided kingdom, though some of the strength of iron will be in it. You saw the iron mixed with clay, and that the toes and the feet were partly iron and partly fired clay. Part of the kingdom will be strong, part will be brittle. So he's saying that this very last kingdom is going to be up and through Rome, and we talked about it a little bit last week, the split of Rome and all that kind of stuff. But up until the end of Rome, every kingdom, there was always an emperor, there was always a ruler, there was always a Caesar, from Nebuchadnezzar down to the Caesars in Rome. But then after the fall of the Roman Empire and the Holy Roman Empire, it was smaller kingdoms. We've had individuals like Napoleon and Hitler and others who have tried to become Caesars or emperors again, but it's never come together. So there's always kingdoms of strength and weaknesses, but they're always divided kingdoms like what we're living in now. We have multiple nations instead of just one nation. Okay, so this is what we have now. So Babylon, which was a kingdom, which was an age from 605 to 539 BC. Then they are defeated by the Medo-Persian army. So the Medes and the Persians come together, and they rule from 539 to 331 BC. Then Greece takes over. Alexander the Great. In fact, we're going to learn about a little bit about Alexander the Great. Alexander comes out of the middle of nowhere. In fact, so it's kind of interesting. When Babylon was controlling the world, Medo-Persia was nothing. They were just fishing villages and things like that. And then before Greece came in, they were just a bunch of little warring nations or warring lands. They were like the Spartans and the Macedonians and others. They would fight amongst themselves, but they were never a great nation. Not until Alexander the Great came, and he sweeps and conquers the world in a quick, very quick, speedy amount of time. It's still studied about how he was able to conquer the world in such a short period of time. And then we have Rome, which begins in 146 BC when they finally overthrow the last of the Greek kingdoms, to 1476. And then from 1476 on is what I have as imperialistic democratic alliances. So in other words, a lot of democratic nations and empires, small empires that are in the world today, that some work together, some don't work together. Some are stronger, some are not stronger. I mean, when you think about it, we see this right now in our world today. So Daniel predicts all these precisely. I mean, it's amazing. He saw these before they even were strong enough to be called nations, coming up and ruling the world. The Romans were nothing before the Greeks. I mean, they just kind of stepped on the bootstraps of. They were lucky. Alexander did so much work to prepare the way for Rome to eventually take over and stuff. And so it's just to me it brings goosebumps and excitement to know that Daniel could predict this stuff so precisely. And we're going to learn even more about that in a little bit here. So it says, as you were watching, a stone broke off without a hand touching it. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and fire clay and crushed them. The iron, the fire clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were shattered and became like chaff. The leftover part when you separate the kernels from the wheat. That like the chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away, and not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Okay, and here's an image of what that might have looked like. Obviously, it's just an artist rendering, but there's the stone that comes down that was not cut by human hands. And it goes on, it says, in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, and this kingdom will not be left to another people. It will crush all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, but will itself endure forever. You saw a stone break off from the mountain without a hand touching it, and it crushed the iron, bronze, fire, clay, silver, and gold. The great God has told the king what will happen in the future. The dream is certain and its interpretation reliable. So Daniel is verifying it. We know now through the hindsight of history that it was accurate, that it was reliable, because it's exactly how it happens. Again, it's just amazing that Daniel is able to, through God reveals it to him, but to tell all these things specifically. And then we're going to give him more details as we get along, and I get excited about it, so just bear with me. So here's what we can learn about the stone. It's a stone uncut by human hands, which means it's not of human origin. So this stone All the other kingdoms were of human origin. They were ordained by God, but they were of human origin. Nebuchadnezzar was a human. Um, Cyrus, the king of the Persians and Medes, was a human. Alexander was a human. Caesar was a human. This kingdom is not human, or not of human origin. And it'll crush all the other kingdoms. It will be everlasting. The stone is Jesus. So he's seeing Jesus come and destroy all of the other kingdoms. And that's what Jesus ends the age of the Gentiles. And that's what we're going to be looking at tonight. Because that leads us right into, because remember, we've already studied the things that were, the things that are, the first two parts of Revelation. Now we're getting into things to come. So if we need to understand the fulfillment of all that, we need to understand the full history of what led up to that. And that's what we're doing tonight. Okay, so now we're in Daniel chapter 7. We're switching to another prophecy of Daniel. Daniel, by the way, as I've said before, is the prophetic or the book of Revelation of the Old Testament. So in Daniel chapter 7, we're going to see Daniel explain these four kingdoms again, but this time he's going to use animals, and I'm going to explain what those mean. In the first year of King Belshazzar of Babylon, so this would be the son of Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel had a dream with a vision in his mind as he was laying in his bed. He wrote down the dream, and here is a summary of this account. Daniel said, "In my vision at night I was watching, and suddenly the four winds of heaven stirred up the great sea. Four huge beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion, but had eagle's wings. I continued watching until the wings were torn off. It was lifted up from the ground, set on its feet like a man, and given a human mind." This is actually a statue in Babylon, and if you've seen any ancient drawings of Babylon and any ancient pictures of Babylon from the statues, they represented themselves as a lion with wings. So this kingdom is Babylon. And so just like the head of gold, the lion with wings is representative of Babylon. Okay, moving on. Suddenly another beast appeared, a second one that looked like a bear. It was raised up on one side with three ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, "Get up, gorge yourself on flesh." Here's an artist rendering of what that would look like. So like a bear or a grizzly bear with three ribs in it. This would be Medo-Persia, the second, so the silver. Interestingly, I got to get this out of my notes here. The ribs represent, and this is why we know who it was, because the ribs represent the three kingdoms that Medo-Persia conquered. They conquered Babylon, they conquered Lydia, and they conquered Egypt. So they conquered those three kingdoms. So the three ribs represent the three kingdoms that they conquered to become the rulers of the world at the time. So the bear is a representation of the silver in the statue. Medo-Persia. After this, while I was watching, suddenly another beast appeared. It was like a leopard with four wings of a bird on its back. It had four heads, and it was given dominion. This is Alexander, and it's interesting. And again, this is why people really wonder. Okay, come on now. How did Daniel get this? Because a leopard, the fastest of the animals, and again, I've already mentioned Alexander the Great conquered the world in such record time and just with such speed that he was, would be referenced like a leopard. So this really points to the fact that this was Alexander that he's talking about here in the Greek age, the Greek time period. Also, the four heads is interesting. There were four provinces of Greece when they took over. So they were controlling four provinces. They were, the provinces, the regions were Macedonia, Greece, Thrace, and the Asia Minor. And in fact, after Alexander the Great dies, because he dies young, I suppose when you've been battling that fast and that hard, you just kind of get worn out. But anyway, he died young, and when he died, the kingdom is taken over by a tetrarch, four kings of the four provinces. So the four heads makes total sense. I mean, and again, this was written. So what did I say? 330. So 300 years almost after Daniel predicted it, it comes to be, and he predicts not only that it's going to be in four provinces and have end up with four kings, but he's going to predict that Alexander was going to conquer the world with great speed. I mean, it's just, the details are just mind-blowing. Okay, let's move on. And so then he goes on and he says, after this, while I was watching in the night visions, suddenly a fourth beast appeared, frightening and dreadful, and incredibly strong, with large teeth. It devoured and crushed, and it trampled with its feet whatever was left. It was different from all the other beasts before it, and it had 10 horns. So this empire, by the way, horns in apocalyptic writing represent kings. So there were 10 kings. While I was considering the horns, suddenly another horn, a little one, came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. And suddenly in this horn there was eyes like the eyes of a human, and a mouth that was speaking arrogantly. I don't want to give too much away because we're going to read exactly what it is here in a minute, but that is the Antichrist, okay, we're going to be talking about. So this is the Roman Empire, and the Antichrist is going to be born out of this idea, or at least this and the imperialistic period that I talked about. As I kept watching, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient Days took his seat. His clothing was like snow, and the hair of his head like whitest wool. His throne was flaming fire. Its wheels were blazing fire. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from his presence. Thousands upon thousands served him. 10,000 upon 10,000 stood before him. The court was convened, and the books were opened. Now, next week we're going to see this same imagery, not exactly the same, but almost word for word, the same imagery in Revelation chapter 4 and chapter 5. So it's kind of cool that, again, written around at this point, see, Daniel was probably 60 at this point, so this is 450 BC, and then John writes Revelation in 95 AD, so we're talking about nearly 600 years between Daniel's vision of heaven and the great throne room, and John's vision of heaven and the great throne room. Okay. I'm sorry, I know I'm going fast and there's a lot of information. I hope I'm not losing you. Then I wanted to be clear about the fourth beast, the one different from all the others. Extremely terrifying, with iron teeth and bronze claws, devouring and crushing and trampling with his feet whatever was left. I also wanted to know about the 10 horns on its head, and about the horn that came up, before which 3 fell. The horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke arrogantly, and that looked bigger than the others. As I was watching, this horn waged war against the holy ones and was prevailing over them until the Ancient of Days arrived. I want to explain to you that the Ancient of Days is the last 3.5 years of tribulation, which we're going to get to in a little bit. And a judgment was given in favor of the holy ones of the Most High, for the time had come, and the holy ones took possession of the kingdom. So we're talking about leading up into Christ coming down and ruling for 1,000 years, and then eventually bringing the new heaven and the new earth after everyone is judged. Okay.
Can you just remind, is this Daniel's dream, or is he?
This is Daniel's dream right now. No, this is Daniel's dream. In fact, every dream that we're going to talk about tonight from this point forward were visions given to Daniel directly. Only the statue was a dream that was given to Nebuchadnezzar. The rest of them are all given to Daniel directly. It would be Gabriel speaking. This is what he said. The fourth beast, again, this is Gabriel speaking. The fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on the earth, different from the other kingdoms. It will devour the whole earth, trample it down, crush it. The 10 horns of the 10 kings who will rise from this kingdom, another king different from the previous ones, will rise after them and subdue the 3 kings. He will speak words against the Most High and opposes the holy ones of the Most High. He will intend to change religious festivals and laws, and the holy ones will be handed over to him for a time, times, and a half a time. Time 1 times 2, so 1 plus 2 is 3, and a half a time, a half. So 3.5 years. This is the first 3.5 years of the tribulation, which we're going to be reading about in Revelation. So he is saying that the first 3.5 years is a time where the Antichrist is allowed to go after God's people, the Jews, and try to destroy them, the holy ones. And then the last 3.5 years is the judgment upon both the Antichrist and those who follow the Antichrist for the last 3.5 years. So that's the 7 years of tribulation. There's the tribulation, and then there's the great tribulation, which is the time of judgment in the last 3.5 years. And I'm getting ahead of myself again, so I apologize. But you're going to learn all about this. I promise you. You're gonna get done with. By the time we get done with the book, you're going to go, "Well, I didn't know it said that. That's amazing." Anyway, but the court will convene, and his dominion will be taken away to be completely destroyed forever. The kingdom, dominion, and greatness of the kingdoms kingdoms under all of heaven will be given to the people, the holy ones of the Most High. His kingdom will be everlasting, will be an everlasting kingdom, and all the rulers will serve and obey him. Trust me, we're almost done. All right. In the first year of Darius, now we're moving into Daniel chapter 9. So that was the explanation of the 4 kingdoms, and the 4th kingdom kind of includes the imperial democratic part that I talked about. So the establishment of the Antichrist coming out of the what we call the world today and stuff like that. So now we're going to move on to how the time frame actually works, and we're going to be talking about this 70 weeks. And this is pretty cool stuff. And this will lead us right into going back into Revelation next week. In the first year of Darius, the son of, a Mede by birth, who was made king over the Chaldean kingdom, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood from the books according to the word of the Lord to the prophet Jeremiah that the number of years for the desolation of Jerusalem would be 70, which is exactly the amount of time that the Jews were in captivity by Babylon, was 70 years. So Jeremiah predicted to the day, again, this is really cool. Jeremiah predicts the day how long the Jews will be in captivity. Daniel, being a scholar and a follower of God, read that, understood that, and so he's thinking, okay, we're almost at the 70 years. It's time to repent. It's time to pray. It's time to seek God again, so we can have that everlasting kingdom that he talks about. So I turned my attention to the Lord to seek him by prayer and petition with fasting, sackcloth, and ashes. Okay, moving on in Daniel 9, it says, in Jeremiah 25, this is what it says. This whole land will become a desolate ruin, and these nations will serve the king of Babylon for 70 years. See? When the 70 years are completed, I will punish the king of Babylon and the nations. This is the Lord's declaration, the land of the Chaldeans for their iniquity, and I will make it a ruin forever. In fact, Babylon has never come back from the destruction of Babylon by the Medes and the Persians. Saddam Hussein thought of himself as being the next Nebuchadnezzar, and he started to rebuild Babylon, the great city of Babylon. Babylon was one of the most amazing cities ever had. It had hanging gardens, and it was an architectural marvel. I mean, the wisdom and the all the stuff that happened. Anyway, Saddam Hussein wanted to rebuild all that, and we all know what happens to him. He gets killed and so on. So the kingdom of Babylon will not reign again until, and we're going to talk about it in the weeks to come, until the last days, till the time of the tribulation. All right.
So what's the time frame between Daniel and Jeremiah, those verses?
Jeremiah was in Jerusalem, didn't go to Babylon. He was left in Jerusalem, and he was older than Daniel, but he was a contemporary of Daniel. So in other words, he was prophesying these things when Israel was taken into captivity, when Judah was taken into captivity. So he is a contemporary but older of Daniel. So he predicted this at the time of Israel's conquered and being taken away, that in 70 years they will return.
So this one, Jeremiah's first?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Yes. So anyway, moving on. Verse 21 says, while I was praying, Gabriel, the man I had seen in the first vision, reached me in extreme weariness. So in other words, what he's saying here is that Gabriel, in a hurry, comes to find Daniel, because Daniel's got it wrong. Daniel's going to write down and say that, hey, 70 years are about up. I prayed for the reconciliation of the people with God. So we're about to enter the age of the new age, the age of the new heaven and new earth. Daniel was under the impression that that's what was going to happen immediately after the 70 years. And so immediately Gabriel comes down from heaven to clarify Daniel's misunderstanding.
So cool.
Isn't it? To think that an angel would just, you're thinking something, and I like, I talked to you about that building thing. I'd love it if Gabriel would just come down and say, yep, Jeff, that building is going to be yours, and this is how you're going to do it, and everything's going to work out just like this. I'd be, wow, thank you. But no, that's not quite how it works for us. But anyway, so he said, it reached me in extreme weariness about the time of the evening offering. He gave me this explanation: Daniel, I have come now to give you an understanding. At the beginning of your petition, an answer went out. So when he's beginning to pray, he's praying all these things to God. God hears his prayer and immediately sends Gabriel to go answer his confusion. And I have come to give it, for you are treasured by God. Gives me goosebumps every time I read it. That's just an amazing thing. I hope one day, I just want to be up there and say that he says, well done, good and faithful servant. I hope he doesn't just say, go away from me, I do not know you, evildoer. I hope he says, because again, there are going to be those in the last days who go before the throne of God and say, Lord, we prophesied, we preached in your name, we healed in your name, we did all these things, and he's going to say, go away from me, evildoers, I don't know you, because they didn't do it. They did it as works instead of doing it in the response of love of Christ. So I'll just be glad if I get well done, good and faithful servant. I don't want the other. Anyway, For you are treasured by God, so consider the message and understand this vision, or the vision. Okay, last passage. I promise you this is the last passage. 70 weeks are decreed about your people in your holy city, to bring rebellion to an end, to put a stop to sin, to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. Know and understand this. From the issuing of this decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the anointed one, that would be Jesus, the Messiah, the ruler will be 7 weeks in 62 weeks. Okay, now let me start off by explaining weeks. How many days are in a week? 7, right? The weeks are years. So when he says 7 weeks, he's saying 49 years. When he says 62 weeks, he's saying 434 years. Okay? So he's saying there's going to be a period of 7 weeks, a period of 1 week, 7 years, and 62 weeks. 7 weeks and 62 weeks for a total of 69 weeks. It will be rebuilt with a plaza and a moat, but in difficult times. After those 62 weeks, the anointed one will be cut off and will have nothing. So what do you think that refers to? So let me explain this. So the first 49 years, the 7 weeks, is the time from when Artaxerxes releases Nehemiah, his cupbearer, to go back to Jerusalem and to rebuild the walls of the city. The city is established after 49 years. After that, we get the 62 sevens, which is 434 years. From that time until Jesus' triumphal entry is the end of the 434 years. So Daniel, in his vision, is able to see that there are 69 sevens. I know it is confusing. And the image I'm going to show you here in a minute will help out some. But there'll be 69 sevens, 483 years. So from the time that Artaxerxes, who is another Persian king, who actually is the husband of Esther, who was if you've read the book of Esther, if you haven't read the book of Esther, you should read it. It's a really good story. It doesn't mention God once in it, but it's a very powerful story about what God can do in providence. But anyway, from that period of 444 AD until Jesus Christ's triumphal entry, which was on March 30th of 33 AD. A week later, he dies. So he's saying 69 weeks or 69 sevens or 483 years will pass between this date and when Jesus triumphantly enters into Jerusalem. He will then be cut off, meaning he will be crucified, he will be killed. The people of the coming ruler will destroy the city and the sanctuary. So that means, and we know that, and I mentioned at the very beginning, 37 years after Jesus dies and is resurrected, Rome destroys Jerusalem. The end will come with a flood, and until the end, there will be war and desolation and decreed. Now this is speaking of the Antichrist. He will make a covenant with many for 1 week. What is 1 week? 7 years. But in the middle of the week, so after 3.5 years, he will put a stop to the sacrifice and offering, and the abomination of desolation will be on a wing of the temple until the decreed destruction is poured out on the desolator. So the abomination causes desolation means that the Antichrist is going to go, and the temple is going to be rebuilt. There's no doubt about that. And in the weeks to come, I have a lot of information to share with you about that. It's kind of cool. But the abomination that causes desolation means that the Antichrist is going to go into the temple and set himself up as God. It happens during the Greek rule. There was, of the 4 kings, or the 4 governors, or whatever you want to call them, there was Antiochus Epiphanes. I always remember that name. I love to do it on Hangman because nobody can figure it out. If you're ever playing Hangman with me and you see two words and I say it's a person, chances are it's Antiochus Epiphanes. Anyway, Antiochus Epiphanes was one of the kings or the rulers of Greece after the death of Alexander the Great. And he's a foreshadowing of the Antichrist because he sets up in the temple himself as God and causes the abomination, causes desolation, which will now then be repeated by the Antichrist. So that's that. Okay, so I know all that seemed confusing. That's why I drew this up. And this took me a long time, but here we go. So we have the age of the ancient world, the age of the patriarchs. We have the age of the Jews from Moses through David to the very last king when Babylon and when Nebuchadnezzar takes over and destroys Jerusalem. From Babylon on, we have what's known as the age of Gentiles. And if you look, the age of the Gentiles continues all the way till Christ's return. But from Babylon, we get Persia. Then we get Greece. Then we get Rome with iron and clay, ultimately. Then Christ is crucified, which is written about in what we just read in Daniel there on the 69 weeks. So we're in a pause. So if you look here, we have the first set of sevens, and that's 49 years. And from the decree to the rebuilding of Jerusalem, it took 49 years. Then we have the 62 sevens, which is 434 years. Add those two together, it's 483 years. And I used to know, and I can tell you, it's 1,800 and some days. That literally, if you take the time to do the math, it actually, to the moment, predicts when Jesus is going to arrive in Jerusalem with his triumphal entry, Palm Sunday. So it predicts to the minute when Jesus is going to enter Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. And then he's ultimately crucified. We reach the church age, which is the last days. So we now are living in the last days. If you read, Paul writes, James writes, who is a brother of Jesus. Peter writes, all these write that we are living in the last days. And that's, even Jesus himself says, we're in the last days. So after the crucifixion, after Jesus goes up into heaven and the church age begins, we live in the last days. Then this is a period pause. Because again, if it were 70 weeks altogether, it would have already happened. And if you read the Daniel passage I just read to you, it really kind of points out that there's a separation between the 69 sevens and the last 7. There seems to, if you read Daniel real closely there in Daniel 9, it seems to see that there's a separation between the 69 and the 1. And that's because there's going to be a great pause, which we now understand that we are in all the way until we get to the 7 years of tribulation. We're going to talk about this in the future here, but we have the rapture of the church that happens at the end of the church age. Jesus Christ will return right before the Antichrist makes a peace treaty with the nations to allow Jerusalem to rebuild his temple. So it is going to be the Antichrist who actually puts together the peace treaty and the funds and the ability for Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. And then he lets them have that for 3.5 years, but begins to become more and more, what's the word I'm looking for, more and more violent and brutal towards the Jews until eventually at the midpoint there, the mid-trib, he sets up the abomination that causes desolation. He goes in and sets himself up as God in the temple. and then we start the last 3.5 years of judgment. And I'm going to, so I'll get you copies of this, and in the weeks to come, I'm going to add stuff to this to help you understand. But I like this. I had this on paper. I drew this years ago on paper from a class from Dr. Bob, my mentor, and I loved it. And so, but it's really in cruddy shape. So I decided to do it out on the computer. But it's not been easy and fun. But I've enjoyed doing it because it's nice to have a timeline to sit there and look at and say, okay, well, this is what it all means. Because I'm not making anything up here. This is exactly what the scriptures tell us on these things. So,
is there any way you can add scripture to that too?
well, I can print out copies on paper for anyone who wants them, so that they can add the scripture to. Or you want me to add the scriptures in there too and stuff, or?
If it's not, just a thought.
I will add from time to time scriptures in there. I should have actually put in there like Daniel 9 for the 77s and some of the other parts. The iron and the clay would be Daniel 2. Yeah, I could have done that. Obviously, Revelation chapter 2 and 3 for the 7 churches. The rapture we'll get into in more detail and why I think that's true. But anyway, I have just one real quick summary, and then we'll have a prayer. So here's a summary of Daniel. God established the age of the Gentiles to judge Israel for disobedience to the old covenant. So that's why the age of the Gentiles. So the Jews have been under the punishment of the Gentiles, have been treated badly by the Gentiles, we the Gentiles, for all this time because of their disobedience to God's covenant. The age began with Babylon and continues until Jesus returns to establish his Jewish kingdom. The age concludes with a single world leader persecuting the saints until he is destroyed by Christ's return. The age will last 490 years. Apart from the long pause, while the Lord works with the Gentiles. So again, if it was 490 years directly, it would have already happened. But we have 483, long pause. I mean, Jesus was crucified in 33 AD. It's now 2023, so it's almost exactly 2,000 years. So it's been paused for roughly 2,000 years at this point, and it could be paused for a lot longer. I'm never going to try to tell you when Christ is going to return. I can just give you the signs and what the Bible tells us, and you can make your own mind up from there. And then finally, when the fullness of the Gentiles has come in, then the final 7 may begin. So the fullness of the Gentiles, when they have reached the peak of their depravity, and ultimately by the Antichrist causing the abomination, causes desolation, setting himself as God in the temple. So those are the things to go. I hope you enjoyed. I'm going to say a word of prayer, and I'm going to stop this, and then if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. Heavenly gracious Father, Lord, we thank you so much for tonight. I thank you. I pray. I hope for those here tonight and those who are listening online that they might find meaning and hope and encouragement, because, Lord, you who hold all of this history and were able to predict it long before it happened, if you were able to do that, how much more confidence should we have in the fact that you can hold our future if we let you? Lord, I pray that we might want to let you hold our future from this day forward. In Jesus' name, amen.